We're here to show you something that is not just theory, but something that is live in the Trustero product today, multi-agent functionality that helps you actually execute complex GRC tasks. We have this webinar to show you. Philip Liu, our CEO, is here to run you through exactly how this works and dive under the hood a little bit. And our CISO, George Totev, is joining here shortly and will be into this chat here. Phil, thank you for joining us. I think this is your first time in quite a while joining one of these webinars here.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I'm actually excited to show what we've been up to, particularly with the multi-agent new product lines that we have. And today, hopefully, I can get to two functionality: policy design analysis, basically the sort of the second line of defense type of capabilities. And if we have time, we could basically talk a little bit more about how multi-agent help you internal audits and they help you be ready for internal audits. So effectively, the first and the third lines of defense, how Trustero AI can help you.
Awesome. Yeah, we've had a ton of product updates with them in the last couple months. Our engineering team has been flying through their sprints lately. So we have a lot to show everyone today. Also on the call, she will be hanging around in the chat and in the Q&A. MJ is our head of GRC. She's instrumental in driving the direction of the product and making sure that it's flexible enough to fit your GRC team's needs. And now joining here in just about 2 seconds is George Totev. He is our CISO. You know him from many of the other webinars and speaking engagements that you've interacted with us in. So George, I'm going to let you take it away because we're about 2 minutes in here and we've got a bunch of things to show these folks. So let's get right into it, George.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited. This is a big announcement for us, and we're going to talk about some really interesting stuff. And so I'm going to start something really simple. And let's talk about the multi-agent. What is the difference between agent and multi-agent? Maybe we should define what agent is. We've been using AI, and I know people are familiar with ChatGPT and Copilot and Claude. The difference between the regular AI and the agentic AI is that the agentic AI does things for you. It's almost like a difference between, probably you're familiar with Grammarly, how it helps you write things. On the other hand, when you use ChatGPT, ChatGPT actually writes things for you. And initially, when the AI started, we were talking about single agents. This is like an artisan that does everything for you and helps with simple tasks. Now, the next evolution is to start using multi-agents. So we're moving from an artisan to an actually industrial age where we have a division of labor and we have those multiple agents. Each of them specializes in certain tasks and they work together as a team to produce the result. So if you're thinking about how the AI is used within the GRC space, in a lot of cases, AI is kind of sprinkled on top of the existing GRCs. So it is super important. It's super helpful because it helps with the workflows that we have. It makes it easier for us to do our tasks, but we still have to do them. On the other side, when we start talking about agents, especially multi-agents, like what Phil is going to talk about today, the AI does the work for you. So simple GRC tasks are spread around multiple agents that focus on what they do best. They're specializing in different capacities, and they put it together and deliver it to you. And because of that, because of this segregation of duties and specialization of the agents, we can do much more. On the other hand, if we do multi-agent approach, we can have each agent really focused on their area, which reduces hallucination, it creates more focus, and ultimately better results. So this is a typical example how a multi-agent workflow works. We give some instructions to the AI system, and then the first agent takes over, and that's like a project manager, analog of a project manager, that decomposes the instructions and generates a plan. Okay, basically, how do I answer this thing? What kind of capabilities I need to pull in order to create this answer. So in the case of, for example, policy design assessment, which Phil is going to demonstrate in a moment, it will look at, okay, I need to fetch the policies and regulation. Okay, get the policies and regulation from the user. Then I need to extract the requirements from those regulations. Okay, get the requirements. Then I pass it to another agent, which will look at the regulatory requirements and start creating policy questions, and so on and so forth. So there is this interaction happening between the agent that is then doing the planning and the human to make sure that the agent gets all the necessary information. And on the other side, the planning agent is pulling on different other agents that are specializing in different areas, like extracting requirements, creating questions, answering questions, and at the end, summarizing everything to deliver the final report. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Phil so that he can show this in practice.
All right. Thank you, George. Okay. So right now, what you're looking at is Trustero's main user interface. And most of our customers start at this interface. And this is as you can see, is a conversational AI interface. And, this is no different than what you will see from a ChatGPT or a Microsoft Copilot type of products. The difference here, however, behind the scenes is that Trustero intelligence actually answers questions from a GRC context. And what do I mean by a GRC context? And this is actually a set of information Trustero collects either through manual mechanism that you're used to or through automatic mechanisms behind the scenes. And these information includes like knowledge-based documents, which will upload e-documents, which for the purpose of this demo, a big part of the AI will be focusing on the policies which have been uploaded into Trustero. We have a control context. Trustero basically can ingest controls from a variety of different sources, from spreadsheets to existing GRC platforms like an Archer. Or you could use Trustero's existing built-in content that we can ship that satisfy a variety of frameworks such as ISO, SOC 2, HIPAA, and so on. We also collect evidence about within your environment. And this is effectively, we will connect to SaaS endpoints to gather configurations on how you're using the various SaaS products in your environment. We could connect to various share drives. So for example, Google Drive or SharePoint sites, and then tell us basically which folder, and it will automatically ingest all the files in the directory and classify the documents into the Trustero context, making it controls, policies, or just general evidence documents. And these documents can be screenshots, can be Word documents, PDF, and it could be videos and so on. So Trustero is able to handle multiple forms and multiple types of evidence and be able to examine these evidence within sort of our control analysis features. And also they have access to existing AI results that's been built up over time. One of the things Trustero do is to conduct continuous control checks using AI on your background. And if we have time today, we'll be glad to share how that works as well. And that information, the results also basically considered as part of the context. And then we have the risk register as well, and various third-party vendor information within the context as well. So all this information is collected by Trustero, and then we actually store all this information in an embeddings database. And this embeddings database will basically give us semantic capability, knowledge about all the information that's been collected. And also, once we have the information in the embeddings database, we create what we call a trust graph, effectively linking your GRC program together, like what requirements the control will satisfy, what evidence will link to a control, what policies basically govern the control. And all this information then further provide a more detailed map of how your program is built. And then so when AI is asked to perform semantic type analysis on this data, it could basically be done within a very confined context using parts of the trust graph and using the embeddings database. So, and basically these techniques are unique to Trustero. And then we have a few patents basically issued on how actually we go about building this graph, and then and how actually we take advantage of the graph to make sure that we have very accurate responses when we actually point LLMs to the context.
So Phil, if I can interject here, there are two major things going on. The first one is that we use this system that is a GRC tuned system. It's an expert or in the GRC space. That's one thing. It's not a generalist. It's very focused. And the other one is that this expert system is contextualized with the specific data for that company, for that customer. It's not just a general data that is pulling from the internet, but it's specifically tuned to that customer.
Exactly. And the combination of these things actually allows the AI to be able to conduct in combination with the agents that we built, and is able to allow us to conduct tasks on behalf of the GRC professional. So I'd like to show some of that right now. And then the use case actually before diving into the use case, let me sort of complete the tour a little bit. So in the interface, we also have a set of pre-built, what we call playbooks. So these are sort of advanced prompts that are built and sort of give you an example or what other things that you could basically extract out of the system. For example, generate executive risk reports to internal access reviews and so on. So there's actually quite limitless on the type of task you could create using the Trustero intelligence system. So, but today I'm going to dig a little bit deeper on how we would perform a policy design assessment. So that means a lot of different things. And the specific thing that I want to do today is that we have a set of policy that's been ingested into this account. And then I want to basically say, well, given this set of policies, is it satisfying all the requirements from a SOC 2, actually not SOC 2, from ISO 27001 information security set of requirements. So let me sort of get started here. So the way we do this is that you give the system a very broad question. So in this case, do a design assessment of my policies. And this means a lot of different things. Like, since we're in a GRC context, the system interprets it like, well, you're doing a second line of defense type of work around policy design of your policies. And then the first thing the system is doing behind the scenes is creating a plan. So basically it's trying to interpret what you're going to do, and then it will generate a plan on exactly what it will do. So sort of matching the expectations of the users. In this case, that the plan involves conducting a comprehensive review of your policies to ensure they align with the most relevant regulatory frameworks, because we haven't told it what framework to basically assess against in the beginning. So this includes analyzing all existing policies, identifying any gaps, and providing detailed report with recommendations for improvements. So the streamlined approach, basically, this is more of a patting yourself on the back in the last sentence. So the first thing it does is say, well, we actually found 34. One of the first agents is basically, well, we need to know what policies that you want to assess. And the first thing it does, okay, we found 34 policies in your account. And then we could take a look at what those policies are. And then we actually have a lot of them because this is our demo account. We actually created a series of policies, although they're consistent in satisfying potentially an organization's GRC program. And so you can see here, there are 34 policies. And this actually comes from the context I mentioned earlier. I'm going to basically say, okay, let's use all of these policies. Great. So the next step is that, well, we can't determine which compliance framework you want to basically assess the policies against. So here are some default sets, right? So HIPAA, ISO, NIST, North Dakota Cybersecurity Act, right? So some esoteric ones in there as well. SOC 1, SOC 2. These happen to be the ones that we previously have worked with. And then so you can select from one that we previously have worked with, so that you're not reinventing the wheel every single time. Or you could basically upload a regulatory document. So this can be an ISO 27001 document, which you have in the system already, but maybe there's a new version, you can upload that. Or it could be a COBIT document, which COBIT actually is kind of interesting because they actually have the documents not in a sort of PDF or Word form, and they actually have it in a spreadsheet. So these are kind of things that our agents are able to deal with and extract the necessary requirements from these regulation documents. So for the purpose of today's example, I'm going to select ISO 27001, right? And confirm my data selection. So basically agent number one, it basically asked me which framework. And now that I told it what framework, it went ahead and extracted all the sections within the framework. Look, here's what it looks like. So, and then in the ISO 27001 regulation document, so there are various sections, the context of the organization, the leadership, planning, and each one of them has some number of requirements within it. And you can see sort of section 4.1, the organization shall determine the external and internal issues, and so on. So we have breakdown by section and breakdown by individual requirements, ISO 27001 requirements.
Phil, you may interject here. It is important to say that the document that you upload is not just any kind of document. It could be a Word document, PDF, Excel, but also the level of the document, because currently we're working with ISO 27001, which is more of a compliance framework, a risk management framework. But in the case of the North Dakota law, for example, that's the actual text of the law. There is no compliance framework associated with it. It has to extract the requirements from a law and then figure out what are the questions to ask and how to answer them. So it's a wide variety in terms of the type of the document and the media of the document itself.
Right. It's also, it's not limited to basically frameworks, laws, or regulations, but also that if you internally have basically a set of requirements you would want to query about your policy, you could formulate any documents and then basically write up a set of requirements. And then that could be part of this as well. So it doesn't really matter where the source is from. Basically, we have the capability to fully extract that into requirement sets that we could then pose these requirement questions to the set of policy that you have selected.
And I can see how that can be used, for example, in policy development, because we can come up with a draft of the policy and then check it against the other policies.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there are various wide variety of uses, a lot of different ways you basically use these AI, multi-agent AI against your use cases. So, but let's go back to the use case here. And then I'm going to select just, for time's sake, I'm going to select just one section. I'm going to select the operations section, the ISO 27001. So basically, we're only going to assess the operations section of ISO 27001 and not the entire set of requirements. This means that we'll only assess 3 requirements instead of, I believe, over 100 or so requirements if we were to do the whole thing, just for the sake of time for the demo. So now that I selected sections, basically, the system's coming back and asking me, well, this is how much work we're going to be doing. Would you like to proceed? I say, yes, we're going to ask about 3 questions. And then now another agent's taken over. Basically, this is the design assessment agent. And what the design assessment agent is doing is taking the section that I've selected from the extraction agent like earlier. And the assessment agent will now take each one of the, each one of the sections, and then each one of the requirements, and then answer the questions for the requirements. So in this case, that the operations section, section 8, and then 8.1 is requirement number 1. In this case, sort of they highlighted sort of the key part of the requirement, basically is to prevent unnecessary exposure of sensitive information, really the key theme of this requirement. And then basically it took the requirement and then formulated in a question. So basically, this is the question that basically the agent posed this question to all of the policies and then came up with an answer. In this case, that it says, yes, the organization adequately addressed the requirements to delete information that are no longer needed, right? And then it basically then went on to rationalize the fact that the information protection policy is involved, the physical environment security policy involved, and the data privacy policy are involved. So these are the policies that basically help you prove that you satisfy this requirement. And then, so in addition to basically the rationalization of each one of these questions, each one of the sections, we also provide the citation basically as proof that actually the rationalization isn't made up. Basically, it came from the source of data you provided us. In this case, the source data came from the context in Trustero. So in this case, you can see page 10 of the data privacy policy, page 2 of information protection policy, and then page 10 of the physical environment and security policy were addressed as part of this, as part of the analysis to answer whether we satisfy these requirements or not. So the data assessment agent goes through and do this for all of the requirements. So this is just one example. So we saw it done with also 8.2 and then 8.3. And then so we can sort of quickly sort of have it, in this case, all green. You can sort of expand all the answers automatically, or we could dig into it one by one. So this is more of a very, very detailed view of the assessments. Okay.
So Phil, a question for you. We somehow kind of picked up a system that satisfies all the requirements. But in case it finds something, I guess it's going to explain why that is an issue and potentially even suggest remediation.
Yes, exactly. So this is the positive case. There are cases, when there are negative cases, usually what happens is not as simple as that. It doesn't exist at all in any of your policies. Usually what it will find something much more nuanced is the fact that it found that, hey, you will address information that things are being deleted but you may not specify whether they're sensitive information or not. Or you may only certain parts of your organization are deleting information and other parts aren't, is able to actually point out those nuances. And then also they'll give you a suggestion as to what you may need to do in order to plug the holes that it has found. So it's actually pretty advanced in how it analyzes each one of the requirements. So this happened to be a very positive case here.
Yeah. And let's not forget that this is contextualized with the customer data. So if it comes up with the recommendation, it's going to be specific for the customer. It's not just a general recommendation.
That's right. The recommendation will be effectively in policy, as we're in the policy that you should make the changes on. So it's very, very specific to the context. Okay, so now that basically the design assessment agent has basically performed the detail assessment, we have a report generator that will give you a high-level report on what it just found. So this is actually what I've showed you is just one section in ISO 27001 had only 3 requirements. So imagine that the entire ISO 27001 will basically be analyzed. So we have over 100 or so requirements. And then it's very painful to basically go through and then read through each one. So in this case, that we will generate a report. Basically, it will give you an overview of what it went over. So in this case, that, hey, here's a nice graph. 3 requirements were analyzed and they all passed. It's all green. And we didn't find anything that didn't pass. And here's sort of a content of the report. Will tell you about the policy, which we'll review. So all the 30 are policy that I selected early in the process. The regulation that we assessed against, in this case, ISO 27001, the total requirements, and give you a overall summary. And so in this case, the overall summary basically review the robust compliance posture, particularly in operations section, because that's the only section examined, which is fully compliant. It's indicate strong foundation. Obviously, I won't go into the elaborations. Some of the key findings, so full compliance in operations, business implications, and the overall risk assessment. And there's still some recommendations around basically how you keep up this work to make sure that like the policies are updated. And these are sort of standard suggestions that we kind of make relative to most policies. And then after we basically dig down, there will also summary section by section. We go through that detail as well. And then the details that I showed you earlier is also part of the report.
So Phil, going back to if there are gaps, it is going to evaluate the gaps and kind of classify them in high, medium, low gaps with some recommendations. So it's not really a project plan how to close those gaps, but pretty close to it. So if you get that report and you give it to a project manager, they can create a project plan with all the resources and everything for you to be able to close the gap. So it's pretty close and maybe even the same as a document that you're going to get from a consultant that performs the PDA for you.
Exactly. And that's the goal here. And then so the goal of what we're trying to accomplish is that we want AI to be able to perform a task for you, which is time consuming and then somewhat mundane, right? So, but yet it requires a level of analysis that only a human can perform at the moment. So this AI, basically, our goal of Trustero is basically provide these type of support in our AI to help you perform these type of tasks. So this is one of them. So this is actually sort of a second line of defense type of use case and around policy assessment against framework. Again, this type of comparison assessments can be done using the system across many different type of things, right? So you could compare controls against framework requirements as well, compare policies against your control, which is in the system to see if there are if there are missing control objectives, which your policy actually derives from your policies. So these are all kind of these type of analysis that can be done using the system. Behind the scene, what we're basically created something somewhat novel in that, there's a planner now that's at the front of every single type of prompt that will create a set of actions that the AI will perform, linking together multiple agents. In this case, that we have an agent in the front end that makes sure that you have the necessary information for you to perform an assessment at the beginning. And then we have an agent that basically help you select a framework and then extract the sections and the requirements of the framework to assess against. And then an agent that perform the assessment by taking the requirements and comparing that against all your policies, which are in the context or policy that you specify here within this particular prompt. And then finally, generate a summarization report for you to be able to take action on. And then so this could be done, as you can see, it takes just minutes to do. This could be done on an iterative basis. As you refine your policy, you could basically run through this again, see where the gaps are, and sort of close the gaps one by one, not only against sort of the requirements, but also against your sort of control framework as well. Right. Okay. So that's basically one of the important parts I wanted to show. But this is the policy design assessment using multi-agents. So here, basically, a very, very simple and broad prompt, and then the system was able to distill it down to the task that you want to perform at hand, and then perform the task for you. So this is basically the second line of defense. So we also have basic capability to help you with first and third line defense, and that's the topic a little bit. That's around what we call control assurance, basically, or AI conducted control checks. And so one way to use basically do this is that you could just use the prompt and say, ask simple questions like, does evidence of AWS show all production data at rest stored on AWS are encrypted using strong encryption standards, right? AES-256. All of us basically knows about this one, right? So encryption at rest. This is something that you want to basically make sure and verify. This is part of sort of internal audit process, right? And so because now, again, you can ask this question of all the information in your context. Remember, we actually have collected information about your controls, and then we collect the information about evidence related to those controls in an attempt to answer this question. So as before, it's going to generate a plan to say, okay, what are we going to do here? And, right now behind the scenes is trying to break down, okay, what should we do? Is it a complicated task? Is it a specific type of question? So is it something that I could do with just one agent, or is something that I need to do with multiple agents that we have behind the scenes? And then, though this is taking a little bit long, I normally come by relatively quick. This effectively is going to generate a plan that says that we're going to play back what you said, and then we're going to look through all of the evidence within the system to see whether we can find proof that strong encryption standards are being applied to your system. This is actually taking a little bit longer than usual. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So as you can see here, the plan involved checking AWS-related evidence to ensure all production data stored AWS encrypted. And then it actually suggested services it will look at, S3, EBS, RDS, Redshift. So these are services which many of us actually use to store persistent data and persistent customer data. And so actually go ahead and it's going to look for these type of evidence within the context. And then, yeah, go ahead, George.
Phil, there was a question while it is working. There was a question on the channel asking about how we deal with multiple environments that could be overlapping. So long as those environments can be described in a way that to provide the context for the AI, we can deal with that. And this is an interesting case here that you're showing with AWS into AES-256, because it identified that as part of the AWS, there are multiple environments. There is an S3 and RDS and so on. And here, when you ask the question, you can ask, for example, pointed question for S3 buckets, or you can say everything for AWS. And based on the context that you have, because in the system, there is an architectural diagram. From that architectural diagram, the AI is going to find out that AWS consists with S3 buckets, RDS, and DynamoDB. So it's going to address the question over here. So long as you can describe to the AI what your system looks like, you give the proper context, then you can distinguish between different environments.
Yeah, that's one way. Also, that we have multiple levels to be able to let you carve out different environments. So at the very highest level, you could basically have multiple what we call accounts. And so basically, these are hardened partitions of different environments. And so, for example, I have access to multiple type of accounts here in my environment. I can switch any one of these. So there's one example of different environments. So this is basically very hard partitions. Another way we could do this is that we sort of scope it within the system by what we call audits. So this happened to be an ISO 27001 audit. But audit basically is a way to basically partition environments. So you can select a set of controls and policies. And then so anything that's related to those set of controls and policies becomes an environment, effectively becomes the context for Trustero intelligence. So that's another way to do this. And the third final way is the finest grain that we can provide multiple environment access is through a context management. So we could basically, for each part of the context, you could include specific items, either by the type or basically by individual instances, and also via tags, which we'll soon be releasing. So you could effectively group data in different manner. So basically 3 different ways for you partition environments, right, from the fine-grained individual policies and evidence, right, to a grouping, right, that you put together around an audit to different type of accounts. So there are different ways for you to be able to create different environments depending on what your use cases are. Okay, so after that aside, let's come back to sort of control assessment or control assurance. So in this case, actually, we found that the fact that AWS S3 buckets, RDS instances, and so on were indeed actually both encryption are turned on, and the fact that we have strong grade encryption configured. So all these cases are there. And so again, we have citations on the evidence proving the fact that these things actually are set. So, well, obviously that this is one way to do it. This could, again, like the policy design assessment case, there are hundreds of these type of questions that you may want to ask as an auditor or as a compliance professional preparing for an audit to make sure things are actually working well, or as an IT professional responsible for set of controls. So in addition to actually be able to conduct ask individual question of Trustero, we actually have a way for you to basically create like test procedures alongside of your controls. And you can actually do this within the context itself. And so in this case, we'll switch focus a little bit to sort of control context. And actually here we have a list of controls. Each one of these are the controls that we have in the system. And then actually let's search for the one that's kind of relevant to what we're talking about is 2. And this is sort of encryption of production data at rest control. So effectively, the question I asked earlier is also encapsulated in control. So in this case, actually, the control, this is basically Trustero's control management interface. And it's also part of the context. The key thing I want to bring your attention to that we have the notion of a test procedure within the control. And then this test procedure is written in natural language form, something that an auditor basically will take action on internally, right? Internal audit team will take action on. In this case, the test procedure will test the fact that the configuration for encryption turned on, and it also tests that the standard of the encryption must be industry grade, right? Effectively, the question I asked earlier, written in test procedure form. So on any basis, whether ad hoc or through scheduling, so we can actually run these type of tests. The AI actually will run these procedures against the information which are in the context. And since actually we're kind of constrained within a specific control, so we'll only run a test procedure against the control context in all the related information. So remember earlier on, I mentioned that we created a trust graph. And effectively, we sort of showed us as linkages here. And then we actually have links to the policy audit that's in various framework requirements that will help you satisfy. So that's part of the context. And the other part of the context are the evidences that's actually been collected. So in this case, that Trustero collected evidence for DynamoDB, for EFS, and a lot of AWS related services, in addition to some manually uploaded evidence. So we wanted to demo the system that the AI is actually able to basically verify not only evidence which are structured, because if you use an API to connect to something, you have structured evidence, but we can also evaluate unstructured evidence. In this case, it's our screenshots that we provided. So the AI is basically is able to basically run the test procedure against a set of evidence which are in the context associated with this control to verify whether you actually satisfy your objective or not. So here are some example results. So let me actually show you one of them. And then the test that we conduct is actually not just the effective test, basically is the procedure satisfied and is it working, but also around sort of the trust graph set of tests as well to make sure that the control itself has necessary prerequisites, right, before you want to go and affect the test. So the policies and the control align, and so they're actually necessary in the amount of evidence associated with the control to conduct the check. And then we finally will conduct the check. So now you can see that in this scenario that here's a summary. So this is very similar to earlier on, you saw the summary that we had created as part of the policy design assessment for sort of the second line of defense use case. And this is the sort of the first line, third line use case where encryption validation. So there's one part of the test procedure and then rationalized, okay, is it satisfied or not? So all evidence such as AWS DynamoDB, RDS, EFS, EBS conviction show that encryption at rest is consistent. So basically all the encryption actually were turned on, and then also verify the fact that all basically the encryption that's turned on also have basically at least AES 256 grade encryption turned on. And again, so there are details, just like we had details earlier within the assessment. So we have basic details on the test. And then it looked at DynamoDB and S3 inventories, AWS RDS configuration, EFS file system, and the EBS and S3 configurations. And so here's some, again, evidence and sources, similar to citation earlier. So here are the evidence that actually we looked at, basically proving the fact that the summaries are correct, showing the fact that the actual control would have passed this actually audit. So this is actually how Trustero uses like multi-agent AI to conduct audits against controls which are in your environment by executing natural language test procedures designed to verify that your objectives are being met in your environment. So this is one control. So Trustero actually do this for your suite of controls, not just one. And then we'll sort of go to, as a result, and once you have all the controls in place, you could then sort of look at, this will then give you an overview of how you're operating. In this account, we actually have 199 total controls, a lot of controls for demo purposes. And then controls are basically then sort of grouped by the framework that they satisfy. So blockchain, digital assets. So we have two, both failed. And then we'll sort of give you a sort of over time, what that look like. And then a DoD CMMC, we have 10 controls, 2 passed, 8 failed. And so this is the status where over time, and so on. So this is basically giving you a high level overview of how you're doing against each one of the framework. Again, the green and the red are derived from the AI conducted tests that I talked about earlier. And then we also have another view to see basically who's responsible for what and what it can be done. And this is, again, is that the green boxes are controls which are in good shape, and then the red boxes are controls which are not in so good shape. And the SCO2 with the one that we were looking at earlier. So here's a protection data at rest. We can see that over the past few days, he has passing the test. And then the interesting thing here is that not only can you do these type of groupings up top, these type of filtering on top, you can also see it by different group. So for example, you want to see how each one of your policies is performing, right? So basically group by individual policies. And then we can see how each one of your department is doing. Yeah, IT has some work to do. So this engineering, HR is A-OK. And so this gives you sort of nice bird's eye view about like what is happening with your program and where work is needed.
We've got about 2 minutes left here, Phil. We've got all of the questions answered in the chat already. So if anyone has any last second questions here, feel free to get them in and I'll let you close out with some closing statements.
So, just to summarize, basically, Trustero were about using AI to help humans conduct GRC tasks beyond summarization of some of the things that you see out there today. It's a different way of thinking about a GRC. And so, it's more than just human workflows. It's more about conducting some of the work that's being done by humans. So hopefully today I show you 2 use cases in policy design assessment and control assurance, actually continuous control assurance, and how AI actually can help there.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you, Phil. George, we've got one last thing to share here, and I want everyone to remember this is about completing complex tasks in your day-to-day GRC work, not just like George showed at the very beginning, sprinkling AI summarization on top, essentially a glorified control F within your environment. Trustero's AI for GRC actually will complete, as you saw, a full policy design analysis. I believe we did one for one of our customers, an ISO 27001. And it took about 15 minutes. And to my understanding, that takes multiple weeks to do it, what we say internally, the old way. So 2 resources here at the very end before we get you out of here right on time. The first one is just to, if you want to see this from one of our experts here, first QR code will take you right to our landing page for that. The second one, our Trustero team here worked diligently on this webinar presentation, as well as the blog post that just went up this morning, detailing the policy design assessment that you just saw here in text form. So please check those things out. Reach out to us if you have any more questions or would like to reach out. Thank you all for joining today to see multi-agent AI for GRC. This is the future of completing GRC tasks, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you.